My name is Gilles Stockton, and I've been a member of Northern Plains for a long time. And I raise sheep and cattle at Grass Range. And they made me moderator for today on this, how corporate consolidation of ag impacts producers and communities and you as a consumer. And our speaker tonight is my friend and fellow rancher, Steve Charter. Steve is the owner operator of the Charter Ranch just north of Billings, Shepherd, Montana. Steve's parents, Boyd and Ann Charters, were founding members of the Northern Plains. And Steve and his family have continued to work for Montana's family farms and ranchers as leaders in our organization. And I might say that Steve and his wife, Jeannie, who has regrettably passed away, were part of the first staff for Northern Plains, along with Pat Sweeney and Kit Mueller. And Steve and Jeannie, along with Margie McDonald, were the people who brought me into and introduced me to Northern Plains in the mid-1980s. And I thank you. So welcome, Steve, and take it away.
There. So, yeah, thank you, Gilles. I'm Steve Charter. I have ranched all my life just north of here, north of Billings in the Hoskins Basin and the Bull Mountains. And almost all that time, I have been involved with my family and other people fighting the concentration and monopolization of the beef industry. So we have a food system that is controlled by a few very big companies.
That's something interesting.
And it serves them really well. But it does not serve the rest of us very well. The producers, people that work in the plant, the consumers, or the environment. And I think kind of being inspired by our speaker on organizing, as producers, looking at the lay of the land, we've been fighting this for years and years and really we have not won this yet, but I think we will. And there's an opportunity, there's a window of opportunity coming up. But we as producers are not powerful enough to accomplish this. And so what we need to do is build a coalition of producers, consumers, people that work in the food system all the way through it, and the environment. And all of us are hurt by this system. And it's not right that just a few big companies can turn this whole thing to their advantage to just make a lot of money. So when I first started ranching, the packing industry was diverse and fairly local. And Billings had a fairly major pork plant and a beef packing plant. And it was a really important part of our economy. And then in the mid-'80s, this all started to change really rapidly. And 4 big companies soon just consolidated, and basically all our local processing facilities were basically run out of business. They could come into a market, undersell it long enough to break those local packers. And then when they were gone, they could raise their prices and then do it somewhere else. So, so this basically enabled these big companies to take a bigger and bigger share of the consumer dollar. And that trend has just continued and continued. And it's just, then when the pandemic came along, it just got to the point of ridiculousness where the packers have been making at times over $1,000 a head on the animals they slaughter, and they turn that over every about 40 days, while producers have been losing hundreds of dollars a day, or not a day, but $100 per head. And this, the situation has just gotten worse and worse. So I guess kind of to give some background on kind of how this happened and the battles we fought, I'll just tell a series of stories that we've kind of lived through, fighting the concentration and what it led to. So in about I think it was about 1990, my wife Jeannie and I and Brant Quick, who was on the staff then, decided we'd go down to the National Cattlemen's Convention in Nashville. And our idea was to just try to get people's attention on what was happening. And they were calling it the chickenization of the beef industry. So these companies had already taken over the chicken industry and were just Cattlemen's Association, because that was the people they supposedly represented were the people that were really going to be affected by this. So when we got down there, we had been in contact with people in the chicken industry and had a couple of chicken producers lined up to tell their story of what it was like to be basically exploited by these basically the same companies. And so when the Cattlemen's Association, the staff there, when they got word that we were down there, it was like the enemy was breaching a castle or something. So everywhere we went, they had security following us. And then when we went to have we rented a room in the convention center for these speakers, and we're holding a press conference. And so they misdirected everybody to the far side of the complex. So everybody was kind of coming in late. And but we were able to deliver a really powerful message of what was going on, but we certainly weren't very welcomed by the National Cattlemen's Association. And I guess it's about that time it became very apparent to us that the National Cattlemen's Association really didn't represent people like me. They represented the very big cattle feeders and the packers. And that's where they got a lot of their money from. But they also got a lot of money from producers through the beef checkoff. So there was a beef checkoff that's supposed to promote beef, but it's all basically run through the National Cattlemen's Association, now the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. And so we just figured we were basically being, this was a mandatory checkoff. Every time we sold cattle, we had to pay $1 a head. And that really galled us that we were basically having to fund an organization that we fundamentally disagreed with and was actually doing us harm. And there was a lot of people at the time that were thinking the same way and just were quietly stopping paying the checkoff that was done through the brand inspectors. And so for a while, nobody wanted to rock the boat, and nobody really did a whole lot about it. But at some point, my wife Jeannie, who was never known to be quiet about things, started writing letters to the editor and advocating other people not pay the checkoff. And so it wasn't very long after that, we received a thing in the mail, and it was Charter versus USDA, and USDA was suing us to pay the checkoff. And kind of to make a long story short, we were in court for, I think, 14 years. At the beginning, nobody would pay much attention to us. They thought it was a lost cause, and we just basically funded it out of our pocket and through friends and neighbors giving us money. But at some point, there's other checkoffs in other industries. And so there was a mushroom checkoff, and the Supreme Court actually ruled in favor that they couldn't be forced to pay it. So then the government changed their whole tactic, and this was always purported that this was a producer-run checkoff. But then the government changed and said, no, this is actually a government program, and it's government speech. And eventually the Supreme Court ruled that that was what it was. And we had, then the checkoff kind of continued on. Then about that time, we were getting fairly vocal and kind of well known for our opposition to this concentration. And we had some, they're called heiferettes, and they're kind of cows that maybe young cows that didn't rebreed, and they're good to feed. They're still young enough. And so we had some of those, and we put them in a little cattle feeder in the Yellowstone Valley. And at that time, there was still probably 4 or 5 buyers that would come and look at cattle and make offers on them. And so when it came, but these were, buyers from the packers. And so when it came time our cattle were ready, he called the various packer buyers, and nobody would even come look at them because they knew who we were and they weren't going to buy our cattle. So here we were just stuck with these cattle with no place to go. And we could just take them to the livestock market and get really low prices for them. But so anyway, Jeannie had been working with the Cattle Women's Association and promoting beef in some of the stores. And there was it was called the County Market, a grocery store in Billings, who was really good about working with them. And so Jeannie went to him and proposed that we could get these cattle slaughtered locally, and we would help promote it and sell local beef. And so we have a chuck wagon we use sometimes. And so we brought it to the county market and set it up in the parking lot. And the first weekend, and we gave out samples and talked to people. And we really sold a lot of beef, and people were really receptive to it. And then we had it set up for the next weekend. So the next weekend we went and set up, did the same thing, but like people were coming back with grocery carts full of it. People liked it so much, because we don't get our good beef back here. The beef that leaves, that comes back is not the beef we send down. So people were really receptive, and we were just thinking, man, this is great. We're going to be able to market our beef locally in a grocery store. And during that while we were there, the meat manager came by and said, "Oh, that's funny. The guy from IBP, one of the big beef packers who sells them most of the meat, came by and wants to visit." And then so he came back about a half hour later and said that he couldn't carry our beef anymore. That the IBP told him if they sold our beef, they wouldn't supply them, and we couldn't supply them with all of them. So nothing really escapes their, no matter how little, they're not going to let anybody in on their deal. So that kind of pretty well soured us on trying to finish our cattle or feed them. But you know, we still basically sell most of our stuff into that big system. But that brings us up to 2 years ago, we had a good year and we kept our yearlings and got them up to, you know, about 800 pounds, nice, good weight. And, but the market in the fall was not good. And we just thought we had a good chance of hitting a better market if we would maybe put them with a local cattle feeder again. And we did that and it was all looking good. The market was good. And then rumors of the pandemic started, and just those rumors totally crashed the futures market. And so when the futures market crashed, then the packers just took advantage of that, and the live cattle market crashed. But beef demand was still great. You know, it was hot. The prices were high in the store and there was good demand. But at that point, the packers, you know, because they're in such a strong position, use that to crash the cash market. And so when our cattle became ready to go, the guy that was feeding them called JBS, because that's the main packer in Utah that takes cattle from Montana. And when he called them, they said, well, if you want to get them slaughtered, you need to, you know, say you're coming, get a slot so we can slaughter them, but we're not going to give you a price. Just bring them down, we'll slaughter them, and then we'll give you whatever we think at the time. And that was pretty crazy. So he said, well, yeah, geez, you call some of these other packers. And he said, well, I will, but, you know, don't expect too much, because basically they informally divide up the markets. And so JBS has this area, and none of the other 2 or 3 packers that we have left will come into that area. And, you know, they don't have to do it formally, but they can do it informally. So basically the only outlet we had was JBS, who really wouldn't offer us a price, but said we could get them. And that's what we had to do. So we took the first load down there, you know, got a terrible, terrible price. And the second load, we did the same thing. It was even worse. And then the third load, they basically said, we don't have room for them. We won't take them at all. And they were where they're getting the cattle from is the big feeders. And so the way that works is it's called captive supplies. And 80% of all the cattle that the packers buy are pre-contracted to the packer. So none of that 80% is competitively bid. And so the rest of the 20% is people like me, just very small producers. But the part that's just crazy is that sets the market for all the cattle. And so, you know, somebody like me has very little marketing power, and we're setting the price for the whole industry. And it's a ridiculous situation. But one reason the big feeders will do that is because then they're ensured that they will have a place to go with their cattle. So the packers were taking cattle from their captive supply and favoring those. And that's explicitly illegal to do. You know, there's a Packers and Stockyards Act, and it said they can't give preferential treatment, but that's totally unenforced. So we had a load of cattle is probably about 40 head, which on the industry standards, that's not very many, but to us, that's pretty significant. We had 40 head of cattle we didn't have anywhere to go with. And so my daughter, Annika, we've always had kind of a very small beef business where we sell beef locally. And Jeannie had started that, and kind of in honor of her, Annika and I kind of kept up doing that, but on a pretty small scale. So Annika had been involved in creating the food hub with Northern Plains. And so she'd been, you know, the food hub had been struggling. It was alive, but just barely. And then when the pandemic hit, people really started realizing how vulnerable they were, and started really supporting the food hub. And Annika came to me and said, you know, I think I could probably sell all those cattle, in an amount of time, if we could get them slaughtered and if we could figure out how to get cold storage. And so she just went to work, and it's very hard to find any local slaughter. They're usually over a year out, but she just got lucky. They were starting a new plant in Cody and got in, so we could get those slaughtered. We got cold storage in Billings, and then through the food hub and direct sales, she just got really busy and started selling meat, and people just really loved the product, were really supportive. And so that was kind of, it kind of forced us into something that was good. But on the other hand, Montana's never going to, there's way more cows in Montana than people. And so we're going to have to, we're never going to be able to just really totally go to a local market, although, that's something definitely we can build on. But one of the big problems is still just being able to get them slaughtered. There's just not the capacity. So what we really need is to, we need the small packers like we have now, but we need like what we used to have, just kind of some mid-size, reasonable size packing plants. And some people think, well, that'll be the answer. And there's kind of government money supposedly to kind of help promote that. But the fallacy to that is, if we just do that, the same thing will happen as it did before, is the big packers will just come and run everybody out of business again. So if that needs to be done, we need packing plants, but then we need the will to not let those big companies just run us out again. So I guess, back to in the beginning, when I say we have a food system that serves these big companies that doesn't serve the rest of us. So, I think Northern Plains is in a really unique position to kind of help push this idea forward that, we're not strong enough as just producers, but everybody gets hurt by this. We're paying way more for this stuff than we should. These big food companies are able to take it all. So I guess what we need to do is organize, but it's got to be beyond, it's got to be everybody that's hurt by this. And that's a lot of people, because all consumers are hurt by it. All the workers all the way through the chain are underserved, and the environment by this big concentrated system. So I guess, well, Gilles will probably get into a lot of this better than I can, but the solutions are already there. We back in the late 80s, we came up with what was called the work rule. And that basically, it was pretty simple. It's just like the cattle had to be bid on. You couldn't have all this captive supplies. And you couldn't give preferential treatment. And so there is there is some legislation coming up, and I don't think it's all quite right. I think the work rule is the best, the best solution to that. So, so I guess I'm just giving a pitch for Northern Plains being a leader to kind of organize this coalition, and that's no small feat. But I do think it's possible, and I don't underestimate the power of these big companies. We tried to reform before and got so far, and then they just overpowered us. But as we heard this afternoon, every once in a while, David does win, and I think that's a possibility. So at that, I think I'll just pass it back to Gilles, who kind of really knows a lot of these details and can paint the whole bigger picture of, it's not just the beef industry, it's the whole food industry that's been consolidated and taken over. So Gilles, take it away.
Okay, I shall. Thank you, Steve. I mean, your story encompasses so much of what is wrong in the food industry and the food system that we have in this allowed to develop in this country over the last half a century. And I'm sure most of our listeners here would love to, have a dialogue with you and understand these issues in a little bit more depth. And we really need to kind of set up that kind of forum. And we will have some questions and answers here and try to have as many as possible. But I just want to take a few too fast here to give a little bit of report of where we're standing right now. As you know, all of the different kinds of farms across the United States are decreasing in numbers, and it's in all sectors: hogs, milk cows, chickens, cattle, of course, turkeys, wheat, soybeans. It's all markets. The one, of course, we're most familiar with here in Montana is the beef industry. And we have 4 companies that control 85% of the fat cattle market. And as Steve had just said, the way to fix the system is to enforce the Packers and Stockyards Act. I have here some slides that come from Dr. Mary Hendrickson, University of Missouri, and she did a whole bunch of analysis of the concentration in the markets of most of agriculture and food. And these are up to date. So if you look at the one to the left, it says soybean processing, Bunge, ADM, Cargill, ag processing. Basically, this is the same if that said corn and wheat. It is these merchants of grain, and they control the movement of grain worldwide. Right? The next slide in is beef processing, which is what we were just talking about. Now, the reason it says that the ratio is 73% instead of 85% is that the white part in the middle constitutes cull cows. The 85% figure that we're always using deals only with fat cattle. All right. So please note that Cargill, which is in the soybean processing, also is a major player in beef processing. All right. Now, pork, again, look there, we have Tyson. Tyson is in beef, Tyson is in pork. JBS is in both. And we get over to the chickens, the same thing that we see, Tyson and JBS. Now, who is JBS? Well, they're Brazilian mafioso, right? In the chicken thing, we have a company that's part of it is actually owned by the communist Chinese government. Okay. So, well, I would just go on to the next slide because I'm sure people will have a lot of questions and like to look at that some more. So go on, next slide, please. What happened to you guys? Okay.
Here, we're on the next slide.
All right, good deal. Now, there on the left again, retail grocery. Now, sorry about that. When you think that you're going to a grocery store and it's a separate company, God damn thing. Kroger and Albertsons each own 20 or so different brands, like Vans and Safeway. These are all subsidiaries of Kroger and Albertsons. And of course, Walmart is the biggest. And in the white part in the middle, that 55%, you say, well, I go to IGA. Well, if you look over to completely to the right, you'll see Cisco and US Foods. Well, they are the ones that supply most of the independent grocers and restaurants and institutional food markets. So, as a consumer, you really are just as monopolized as we are as producers. Let's go on to the next slide if we could. All right, this is just to kind of show you that even in the grocery store, your choices are much less than you really think they are. The shelves have hundreds of brands, but in the cold cereals, it's Kellogg, Post, and General Mills. Soft drinks, it's Pepsi-Cola, Pepsi, Coca-Cola, Dr. Pepper. Beer, Anheuser-Busch and Coors. I don't want to belabor that, but the thing is to understand as a consumer, you're being very much manipulated. You don't have the choices that you think you have there. Can we go on to the next slide, please? And then back here to the cattle industry, these are the players. And there's Steve with that little arrow on the left, independent farmers and ranchers. And he's got a minuscule 15% of the market, or at least he shares that. But he doesn't have the ability to set any prices. But there's a lot that's going on now in the Biden administration. It's really, there's a lot of things that are being considered right now in Washington. Kind of too much because we're not really prepared to respond to it all. The Biden has issued an executive order to restore the Gypsy Rules. These were interpretations of the Packers and Stockyards Act that was proposed by the Obama administration and then overturned by Trump. And these rules define what is unfair or discriminatory in the market for poultry, hogs, and cattle. The president also ordered USDA to fix the fraudulent use of the product of USA label. As you may recall, all they have to do is take Brazilian beef, repackage it, and then slap a label on it, calling it product of USA. In addition, our Senator Tester has introduced the American Beef Labeling Act to restore mandatory country of origin labeling. Our work here through our COOL committee has been very instrumental in having this happen. I mean, for the last two legislative sessions, we sponsored bills to have the cool restored on the state level, and we lost. We lost to the affiliate of the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, the stock growers. But we kept the issue alive. We developed a lot of interest, people understanding the issue, and now we have a chance to have it re-established on a national level. Steve mentioned the work rule, and this is a rule that we submitted to USDA in 1997, which would restore competition to the fed cattle market. And the concept is very simple. Cattle should be bought and sold in a transparent, competitive market, as compared to what we have today, which is blatantly non-competitive. There is a precedence. This is how they fixed the market monopoly that they had in 1921. They required the packers in those days, who simply told the producers what they were willing to pay, that they had to do their buying in an auction market. And it worked. And by the 1970s, the four-firm concentration was only 26%, right? And all of our problems in beef date from the beginning of the Reagan administration. So we are in the process now of reintroducing the work rule, and we hope that we'll be able to do it with a better descriptive name. And we need your participation in this campaign. So please sign up in the chat. And if you have some questions for Steve, sign up in the chat too, and we'll go right to the questions. Thank you.